Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening, however you're listening. This is Quantum of History, and I am your host, Donnie Waldron. If you're listening on the podcast, welcome back. If you are watching me on YouTube, my first YouTube video, my first time I actually designated a video to YouTube. I'm going to turn the other episodes into YouTube episodes eventually. This is the first one I'm doing, video for YouTube in addition to the podcast. So welcome. If you haven't listened to me before, if you haven't seen me, or this is only use YouTube, check me out on my podcast. The first, 17 episodes before this one. This is episode 18. This is going to be Dr. No. And just like James Bond, Quantum of History is going to start its foray into something else on Dr. No. So I'm very excited to see what happens with this. We got a couple great guests today, great stories, great topic. We're going to talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs invasion, how it relates to today even, with the sentiments in the political climate. We're going to talk to Daniel Gomez, who his grandfather actually was in the Bay of Pigs invasion. So it's really interesting perspective, really cool stories about how his mom got here, how his dad got here. We're going to have Kyle from Easy Smiles and Expensive Watches. If you are in the Bond community, you know exactly who he is. He's everywhere. So it's going to be an exciting time. So without further ado, let's dive right in. My favorite, not my favorite. I don't know. I'm always saying these things are my favorite. I never know. I just love them all. Like I said, there's 6/10 for me, and they can all interchange, but definitely my most watched. Without a doubt, my most watched Bond film, without a doubt. Dr. No. We're going to start bringing in Cuban Missile Crisis. Let's come in hot. Around the time that Dr. No comes out, 1962, Cold War's at its precipice, and Castro, Cuba, the Soviet Union, they're all standing defiantly to the United States' interests and demands. So the Caribbean was being careened by the Soviet Union and the United States. They were both trying to get control of this area. Now, the island was within missile range of U.S. soil, and the threat of nuclear warfare was really fresh in people's minds because it was only 20 years earlier that the world was mired in World War II. You know, the wounds, the scars, the battles, the fear, the barely scabbed over. You know, the Cold War was in crisis at Cuba. We're really continually picking at the scabs of the wounds of World War II at the time. And really the atom bomb that leveled Hiroshima and Nagasaki left the world with a new reality. You know, like things were different. You can't drop a bomb that levels 2 entire cities and not have it really play on the fears and imaginations of what these countries were not capable of in the future. So that's really what the Cuban Missile Crisis was. That people remember that. It was barely 20 years before that they dropped the bomb. So it was definitely fresh in everybody's wounds, and the Cold War was becoming on everybody's mind. It was taught in schools. Sit on your desk if something happens, a nuclear bomb just... Is it over? If you're listening to the podcast, you don't get it, but I definitely did a great job of duck, dive, and cover. The Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis really showed how spy games were being played at the time. In how the CIA, who was really in its infancy at the time, was barely formed, still in its infancy, still trying to figure out how it wanted to do things. This would be the blueprint that they would get better at. But they would keep using this blueprint throughout the rest of the time. They still use it today. But they were just rookies at it at this time, and they didn't really know how to do it, and it was a complete and utter disaster. So what the CIA did was they took a group of Cuban exiled refugee soldiers that were trained by the United States. And these Cuban soldiers were trained and sent to combat Fidel Castro, who had just overtaken President Batista. So President Batista was Fulgencio Batista. But President Batista at the time was regarded as a cruel and disliked, but Batista cooperated with the United States and the United States' interests. Part of the reason why Castro came to power was because his platform was anti-United States, because the United States companies had gone in there and were using the sugarcane and all sorts of other resources that Cuba has, and they were taking them out of the country and pulling them out. Castro's idea was that these United States interests were coming into Cuba and like pillaging their resources without Cuba reaping the benefits of that. And Castro's plan, what he proselytized to the people, was that this is our land, this is our resources. We should be the ones getting rich on it, not the U.S., not them. They're coming in. They're the enemy. And you see this time and time again, especially in the Cold War. We did the Diamonds Are Forever episode. You see this time and time again, is that even though the person that they're picking may not be the best, may not be a good leader, may not be good for the people, but if they stay vested with the interests of the United States, a lot of times the United States will stick with them, and they create bad world views because they're backing a dictator who the people hate. But if the new person comes in, especially Castro, who is, by all means, there was even talks about how charming, and especially when he first became like the revolutionary, him and Che Guevara, but you see people with Che Guevara shirts all the time, which bugs me because you don't even know who Che Guevara is. I'm not going to really talk about Che Guevara, but how many times do you see the people with the Che Guevara shirts? No. Research who Che Guevara is before you wear a shirt of Che Guevara. But it's another thing that bothers me, but I won't get into that right now. But you know exactly the type of person wearing the stupid Che Guevara shirts. And you don't even know who he is. Why are you wearing that? Take off your Che Guevara shirts. You don't know who he is. But these two guys became very popular. They grew huge support in Cuba for their overthrowing of Batista. They were the new ones. They were going to be, and you're seeing it today. You're seeing it today in the United States. This socialism thing, it's coming in, and it's such a seductive philosophy, socialism, because in its heart, and what it actually is trying to say is not bad. You're trying to say that, we should all be equal, we should all share, we should all be amazing. It's just that you're going on the views that humanity is great, and that everyone will sit there and sing kumbaya, but in reality, you're not. It's just not humanity. I made this analogy before, and I'll make it again. If you have 5 people, do a group project for college, 5 people. How many are actually worth anything? All the time. There's going to be one guy or girl who takes complete control of it and does most of the work. Another person who does most of the other helping work. 2 guys who are like, what a bare minimum. And then 2 guys that are or another guy that's just complete crap. Right? Who doesn't do anything, who just puts his name on it and gets the same grade as you do. And that's just with one group project with 5 people. You spread that out over 300 million people and try to get any kind of efficacy out of it. It's just impossible. And that's always been the fault of socialism, and it's never worked. It's never been implemented right. Well, it has been implemented many times, and it's all failed every time. It's been a miserable failure each time because we want to be lazy. I want to sit down. I want to sit here and do my podcast and get paid. I don't want to have to. I had a shooting last night. I'm on 2 hours of sleep, and then I got to go back in for overtime because I can't live on a base salary. That's the reality. But I would love to just sit here and get paid and do this podcast all day and watch Bond films. But that's just not. You got to stay motivated, and socialism is the great unmotivator of people, and it's so un-American. But yeah, that's my proselytization. Move back on to the Bay of Pigs. But it's the only reason I bring that up is because it's so relevant, because that's how Fidel Castro came into power. Fidel Castro came into power not because he was preaching hard work around like that. He was preaching, we're all going to share this, and we're going to get all the foreign influence out, and this is going to be ours. So you're seeing the socialist thing come up now, and that's why it's relevant. That's why I bring it up now. But the CIA has this elaborate plan. So they take B-26 bombers that are United States bombers. They fly them to Venezuela, paint them over there. They paint them to look exactly like Cuban Air Force. And then their plan is to fly the B-26 bombers over Cuba, over Castro's Air Force, bomb all his Air Force, wipe them out. Once that's wiped out, then they go in on boat, and then the invasion comes on land. And that was the idea. Well, the problem was that the CIA, The CIA sold it to Kennedy that we are going to be able to do this with no problem. We're going to be able to do this as clandestine. No one will know that no one will know our involvement because we're going to use only Cubans. Well, the problem with that is if you're going to use locals, and you're going to use, and it's the way with anything. If you try to do any kind of operation where the more people you involve, the more leaks you have. And that's exactly what happened because Castro knew about the plan well ahead of time. He actually even moved all his plans. Not like he had a bunch, but the ones that he did have, he moved from the Air Force Base and hid them. So when the American bombs with face paint on came flying over, they couldn't see it. The intelligence had forgotten that there was a radio station, or hadn't seen it. There was a radio station right on the invasion. So it's right in front of the radio station. The radio station is broadcasting throughout Cuba exactly every move that the invasion happens. And then where they land is full of coral. So all their ships sink. So now they have no ships. All their supplies are sinking to the bottom. Then they have to swim in. It looks like the sound is like something out of Monty Python. So by the time they get to the land, they're expecting American backup. John F. Kennedy there's no way Kennedy was sending the U.S. military into this. This was, hey, if it works, it's a Hail Mary. If it works, cool. If not, we're going to take our losses. It's all told, 400, by the time it was done, 400 of these exiled refugees lost their lives. 1,100 were captured by Castro, and it was over same day. And that was it. After that failed mission, at that point, the United States just was like, done. I'm out. America washed its hands of Cuba and let it fall. Let it fall to communism at that point. There was nothing they were going to do. They weren't going to do a full-scale war in Cuba because Soviet Union was heavily in bed with Castro. He armed Castro. They funded Castro. Castro got to power, one, through his platform, his charisma, and his funding from the Soviet Union. So you couldn't attack him unless you wanted to bring him to a World War III, which, again, no one wanted. A year later, Dr. No is released. James Bond lights up the screen, captures the imagination of everybody, and then a week after that, the Cuban Missile Crisis happens. The United States routinely sent spy planes over Cuba and would take photograph pictures. On one of these missions, they saw a missile silo being built. And the missiles weren't there yet, but clearly missiles were coming. The Soviet Union was building it. So it comes back with the information and brings it to Kennedy, and Kennedy has an emergency meeting because this is a big deal. I mean, this is nuclear missiles. From our last episode, space race was already going on. So we knew that the Soviet Union had the capabilities to send a man to space. They easily have the capability to send a missile across from Cuba to Florida or even further. No problem. And everybody and his biggest political advisors sit on it for about a week, decide what they're going to do. While they're sitting on it, the plan is made. They send out a naval blockade to Cuba and basically quarantine. I hate using that word, but I read it and they used that word. It's what they did. So quarantine Cuba, make sure that the Soviet Union couldn't bring ships in or bring supplies to Cuba. Nothing could come out. Kennedy gets on the TV, does a huge broadcast, unequivocally condemns the actions of the Soviet Union, demands that they stop, demands all this other thing, that it needs to be torn down right away. And for 13 days, the world holds its breath. It's going to see James Bond. It's going to see this mad doctor in the Caribbean with missiles, like interferes with missiles, and they're living it. And what a time that must have been. I know it's scary to thought about, but my God, what majesty it must have been to watch James Bond in 1962 do all these fantastical things in the midst of living through the same thing. So the Kremlin and Kennedy finally do an accord. 13 days is over. The missile silos agreed to take down. The details of what the actual accord wasn't released until 20-something years later. The agreement was that the Soviet Union will take down the missile bases in Cuba if the United States takes down their bases in Turkey. So that's the arrangement that was made. That was the compromise. If this was your first time listening to my monologue on YouTube, again, thank you again. for giving me a listen. And what I really try to do with this podcast, with this YouTube, whatever this is going to be, is understand how important it is to understand history and entertainment, and how James Bond coincides so much with it, and how much we can learn, and how much history just keeps repeating itself over and over and over again. So that's what quantum history is all about, is that these things are entertainment, but they come from a real place, and this real place keeps happening. And you can see even from the start of the James Bond films to today that we can keep learning lessons from these movies. So I'm going to bring in my good buddy, Kyle, from Easy Smiles and Expensive Watches to really help me sort this all out. So without further ado, welcome in my good buddy, Kyle. All right, so welcome again, Quantum of History. We got my good friend Kyle on from Easy Smiles and Expensive Watches. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for coming on today, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm doing well.
You ready to class up this party a little bit?
Well, I think I kind of dressed down for you because I got the Quantum of History official merch on today.
Set up a little more and show that off. Oh, look at those pecs.
Oh yeah.
Those are 3-plate pecs right there.
Coral has nothing on me.
You could definitely fill up that red polo. You would definitely look better in that. Well, thanks for coming on. As you know, we're going to be doing Dr. To today. And Dr. No is, I keep going back between if it's my favorite Connery or not. And it's my most watched. So how does it rank for you? How do you feel about it?
Pretty high. I mean, I just watched it the other day in celebration of Global James Bond Day, and it really holds up. You could tell that the budget's got a little bigger over time. The special effects got a lot better, but it's such a classic. Connery's in his prime. I rank it up pretty high. I don't know if it's my favorite Connery either, but it's probably number 2 or 3.
Yeah, I think even for me, even the mystique of him showing up at the airport and not knowing exactly what to do. It's not like he's checking a phone. It's not like he has pictures of everything. It's not like he can do everything. He just literally shows up and he has to rely on his intuition. He has to rely on his instincts, his gut, and everything he knows to try to get even to the hotel room, which is not an easy task. You think now, Uber, my phone, here it is, call, Skype. It's so different than I think that mystique is what I love about the early Connery movies.
And the way he goes about his mission in this one, and you probably appreciate it. I mean, he's behaving like a good detective. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's kind of what he is in Doctor. He keeps following the mystery and unraveling another level and another level until he finally gets to who's behind it. And he's good. He's good at it. He's just efficient, like a skilled hunter in this one.
Exactly. I know even today, like when I do my job as a detective, even juries and stuff like that expect there to be like this amazing DNA that you get, hair samples and all this stuff. The reality is that still even today in 2020, the way you get it is good detective work, talking to people, good bringing things out of some people. And that's what you see in this movie is it's not about the gadgets, it's not about the cars as much. It's really about him just going there and unraveling the mystery and solving what he has to solve. And then the thing he uncovers a bigger plot is what happens. So the mystique of it, that's what I love. The storyline is just, for me, grade A.
Yeah, it's James Bond in his prime, and it's interesting to see that in the first movie because we're so used to origin stories now, especially like when you look at the superhero stuff, everything starts with an origin story. This one didn't. I mean, this is James Bond. He's already the best secret agent out there at the top of his game, which is great to see. I like it when Bond is, efficient and precise and capable.
What about the rest of the things? What do you think about, Ursula Andress and Sylvia Trench and all that?
I love Sylvia Trench. I think she's elegant, and that red dress that she wears, I think you could wear today and it would still look timeless and elegant. I think it's perfect woman for James Bond's first romantic interest. And then how can you get more iconic than Ursula Andress in the white bikini?
Yeah, exactly. I think the same thing. Even when you see her in his T-shirt when he comes with playing golf in his room, like walked in the room, I'd be very excited about that little presentation.
Yeah, I agree. Timeless. Yeah, Sylvia Trench for the win. Now, do you think she's married? Because she's got a ring on, and in the Fleming novels, they say like James Bond has lots of affairs with married women in his spare time. I've
Oh,
wondered if Sylvia Trench is a bored housewife and she's out, looking for some excitement from a man like Bond.
well, first of all, James Bond's a perfect side piece. But yeah, I could absolutely see that because you could see even how aggressive she is. It's not. This isn't a coy, single, young, naive girl. This is a girl who sneaks into your room, wears your coat and nothing, wears your shirt and nothing else. Like
Oh yeah,
that's cougar. That's cougar
she,
action.
she's a lady, but she's a lady who knows what she wants and she knows how to get it.
She's a Tom Jones lady, right?
Yeah,
She's a
right. Yes.
hero. How about the villain, Doctor No? Especially now as we've got with No Time to Die and everything going on with that.
Another classic, another home run right off the bat. I love when Spectre is behind the plots of Bond movies, and Doctor No is one of those villains. I think because you don't see him for so long, you only hear him. It builds up the mystery a lot, and it makes him seem even more nefarious. Everybody's afraid of him. Even his underlings are terrified of this guy and what he's going to do. I think he's a terrific villain.
Even the set piece when he first gives him the tarantula, and the
Yes.
ominous. He's in this small room, and it's this big room, and there's nothing to it. It's barren. It's just got this really ominous, like you said, nefarious, ominous feel to it. It was like this guy, whoever this voice is not to be messed with.
It totally works because it makes Professor Dent look like this little guy who's in over his head because he's in this vast room and we're looking down on him, and we're kind of in the point of view of Doctor No, down on this little guy
Yep.
from a position of power.
Yep, absolutely. And how do you think about the ending?
What part of the ending?
Just when the whole missile and everything like that, how it all comes up.
It's good. It's not as action packed as we'll see in some of the later movies, but it doesn't need to be. I mean, the hand to hand combat between Bond and Doctor No is great, and then like I said, I love it when Bond rides off into the sunset with the lady, and he does it, right off the bat in the first movie with Ursula Andress. Felix
Yep.
just shaking his head like, "Oh, that's my James."
Yeah, I agree. I think that the ending of the movie is the weakest part of the movie. But
Yeah, I'll agree.
if I'm gonna be a critic of the movie, is it gonna be a sign of the times, sign of the budget, or is it a sign of writing, acting, anything like that? So when it's clearly a sign of the times and the budget and the technology, I give it a complete pass because you know what you're trying to do. They just don't have the means to do it. So while it doesn't hold up as well as the rest of the movie does. You can't fault it for that.
I'll agree with that. And it's amazing how they hit a home run right out of the gate and set the formula for the rest of the series. I think that's why the series has been so successful because they started off really strong. It's kind of amazing that this movie came out a week before the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then a week later, after English viewers were able to see this movie, nuclear missiles show up in the Caribbean. Which, I mean, that's the plot of Doctor No. I mean, it's not exactly the same. They're not controlled by the Soviet Union. They're American missiles that Doctor No keeps toppling, which is kind of interesting, and that's a problem that U.S. missile scientists had for a long time. They couldn't keep it up for a few years.
We've all
Yeah.
Hey,
That happens to lots of guys.
Sometimes the Jack Daniels wins. I don't know what to tell you, buddy.
No, it's true. U.S. rocket scientists had a hard time keeping it up, but it's kind of I'm always amazed that this movie pretty much predicted the future, that rockets in the Caribbean were going to become this massive geopolitical issue. But I mean, to the brink of World War III. I mean, it is very much a Spectre plot come to life, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
One last thing, Kyle, before we get going here. So we talked about scientists who have trouble keeping their missile in the air. If you had one of the Bond girls to keep your in the air, who's keeping your missile in the air?
Are we talking marriage, or are we talking
just
one night, no questions asked?
Just keep the missile up.
I'm gonna go with one from left field. I'm going to go with Fiona Volpe.
You know what? That's not left field. When you see her lying down on the back with the dress, I'm like, she needs to get her due because those are
two magnificent. What would Fleming have called them? Protuberances.
protuberance. Yes. The missile would be right into Mars. Right?
Yeah, I don't know if I would marry her, but just the one that gets the blood boiling. Fiona Volpe.
The one that gets the man to Mars. So. All right, Kyle. Thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a lot of fun. As always, looking forward to doing this again. Future episodes. If you're not following him, Kyle from Easy Smiles and Expensive Watches, you see him everywhere. See, you got the best gig in the Bond community because everyone wants you on their podcast, and you just get to be the guest, do the fun part, and you don't have to do the editing part.
Pretty much. I'm like, who is that guy? Johnny Carson used to have a guy come on like anytime he couldn't get another guest. I think it was Bob Hope or Dangerfield or somebody like that. That's me.
You're the Dangerfield. I love you're the Dangerfield. That's great.
I'm an easy lay when it comes to Bond. I'll do anybody's podcast, anybody's live stream.
I can't get no respect here, huh? All right, Kyle. Thank you guys so much for coming on today. Again, Easy Smiles, Expensive Watches. Kyle, my man, take care. We'll be doing this again soon.
Thanks, Donnie.
Thank you, Kyle, for coming on again. He's so good. He's such a natural, isn't he? Like, he's just so good at this stuff. He's such a good speaker, especially on the movies and the books. I don't think there's a better person to talk about James Bond books than Kyle. He knows those books front to back. And he's so good at talking on it. And he's such a fun dude, such a funny dude. I've met him a couple times in person, and we've talked a bunch. So, always a treat having you on, buddy. And he just, like I said, he nailed it when he said that James Bond lives 5 minutes in the future, and it's so true. And with Dr. No, it's so true. And his pick of Fiona Volpe, I can't argue with the guy. I think it's my sleeper pick too. If it's not going to be Anna, I think Fiona Volpe might be mine too. I go back and forth. Same with the movies; they're all 10s to me. But Fiona's got a special place. So, what we're going to talk about next, and I'm going to bring in my good buddy Daniel Gomez. Now, Daniel is a Cuban American living in Miami. He is affected by this. His family heritage is affected by this. He knows it. He's intimately aware of what Cuba meant to the people, what this revolution meant, and what the consequences that happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis, how that revolution from Castro to the fail of the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, how that all affected today, and what it is, and you're even seeing it today in this election. You can hear it all the time. I'm going to talk more with Daniel, but you hear it all the time in this election section. Like Cuban Americans in South Florida are having a huge voice and are going to come out big for this election just because they lived through socialism. They know what it is. They know the snake oil that these carpetbaggers are selling. And we'll see. So without further ado, my good buddy, one of the first guys who ever helped me out on this journey, Mr. Daniel Gomez. Welcome in, my good buddy, Daniel Gomez. You've been with me from the start, buddy. Welcome on to Quantum of History. I'm excited to have you, man. Introduce yourself.
Thanks, Donnie. I got to admit, first and foremost, that for me being on your podcast today, it felt like an NFL player getting the call from the coach saying, "Hey, you just got drafted." It was long enough.
Well, this isn't exactly the NFL.
No, but that's how I felt. So
Yeah.
Just know that when anybody else gets called in from Donnie to be on the podcast, just know you're getting the call from the coach in the NFL.
I appreciate it, man. Well, you've been since the start. Since my first episode, when I first started getting into this, you've been a huge supporter. Even before I actually started, and I started with Zoom calls and all that. So
Yeah.
I always thank you for support, man. You've always given good advice. So happy to have you on, man. And perfect timing. You're one of the two YouTube launch.
Oh, that's awesome, Donnie. Well, I'm glad I could be one of the first interviews for your YouTube channel. So let's do this and break a leg.
All right. So we're going to talk about Dr. No. Now, Dr. No has a special place in my heart as far as how I feel about the movie. It's probably my most watched Bond film. And how does it feel to you? How does Dr. No strike you?
Well, Dr. No for me has always been, prior to the release of Casino Royale, has always been Bond's origin story for me. Because you kind of see how M introduces him to his new firearm in the Walter PPK, and it kind of just launches the character into this spy genre of movie.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I love Dr. No. I'm a huge fan, and what we're talking about today with Dr. No is the historical influence. And Daniel, you have such a really good perspective to be able to speak on this topic. So we're talking about the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis and everything that happened that paralleled Dr. No's storyline. You happen to be a Cuban American in Southern Florida, which your grandparents, I know you have a great story to come through. What did it mean, the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and everything that's gone on with West Cuban? How has it affected you, and what has put your trajectory of your life, and how has it affected, and what are the implications on that?
So, Donnie, the best way to answer that is really through the story of my biological grandfather. So, on my dad's side of the family. So, when the Bay of Pigs happened, it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, as we all know historically. And just to give kind of a background perspective on the Bay of Pigs to your audience, the Bay of Pigs happened when Fidel Castro was climbing over the mountains of Cuba to take over the reins of government power from President Batista. Long story short, he overtook President Batista and took over the island as a whole. Now, my grandfather was part of, in Spanish, it's called La Brigada 2506. In English, for the English audience, it's called the Brigade 2506. And what it was is it was a group of individuals who fought, and they were mostly inland Cubans, to help thwart the regime power that Fidel Castro was going to bring. So these inland Cubans knew, or these native Cubans knew, that the type of government, which is socialism and communism, that was going to be arise was not what they wanted. So all these native Cubans fought to try to keep the land the way it was when President Batista was in power, because he allowed the country to flourish. He allowed people to have businesses. My great grandfather on my mom's side had a Goodyear tire business, sort of like the ones that we now see locally, you know, when you need to get a tire change. But when Castro came in and brought in the socialist, point of view, he took out that business altogether. So my grandfather lost his business as a whole.
What did your grandfather talk about what the sentiments were, the climate, as far as the change was happening when Fidel was rising from Batista? Because I've kind of read conflicting things. I've heard that Batista wasn't good for the people. He was kind of a cruel dictator, or not dictator, but leader. What did your grandfather ever talk about how Cadet Castro went from revolutionary to dictator?
Well, Donnie, to add perspective, my biological grandfather, who served in the brigade, died when I was about 4 years old, max. So I never really got to have the historical talks and whatnot. But what I can tell you is that from when he came back, because another part of the story about my grandfather is that he was imprisoned. He was a prisoner of war. And because that battle of the Bay of Pigs was so intense for him, he had his best friend die in his arms. And he died in his arms in like I forget now at the top of my head, but it was a cruel treatment with water. I wish I can remember the style of punishment now, but
waterboarding, or
something close to the edge of waterboarding. But he was imprisoned there and in Cuba for almost, I think, 10 years, and it took him a very long time to get out of Cuba just to come back to the United States, because both of my parents fled Cuba in different stories during the Bay of Pigs, but yeah, so it was like that. But for the most part, what I can add as an answer to the question that you asked, my grandmother on my mom's side would say that Bautista, for the most part, was a very balanced type of leader. It wasn't so much that he was so extreme on one side that the country couldn't prosper, because that wasn't the case. Because my grandmother, when she was a child, lived very lavishly, to the point where there was a big house. It was multiple families that would live in there. So think of it as like a 2-story home with 2 families, and then on top of that, they had a maid. So it's almost kind of like, to picture for the audience who's listening on audio, think of it in the sense of like the style of living that's portrayed in Gone with the Wind.
Yeah. So what did they think? Is your grandma still alive?
No,
still
she passed away in 1999. But that was about the only true tidbit that I really got from her, because I was so young, during my youth, and having her alive. So like the historical appreciation that I have now as an adult wasn't really reflected then as a kid, but I understood it, and I carried the Cuban American heritage with me.
So what are the sentiments now? What are they? So did there any more, like when your father, is there any kind of harboring resentment towards the U.S., or is it still all the resentment based upon resenting Cuba and Castro and what he took over?
Well, I'm gonna make you chuckle with this answer, but Donnie, so when my dad came to the United States, one of the things that he did is he ended up getting a job down the line in federal law enforcement. He became a U.S. Customs agent. So he basically took on that badge, if you will, because he wanted to fight the good fight for this country that gave him an opportunity to escape the oppression and the communist way of living in Cuba. So
I think that's such a, like, thank you, your dad, for his service, but it's such a, people think that when immigrants come to this country, or people, they're anti-US and they want overwhelmingly, you find so many people who are like, I just am so happy that I got the opportunity, and that come from somewhere that doesn't have the benefits that we have, that doesn't have the opportunities that we have. So when they come here, they're so American. I have one of my best friends is from Kosovo. He came over and he joined the military. He's got American tattoos everywhere and all stuff like that. And it's the sentiment, and it's so often it's just underappreciated what actually happens when you come here. And as far as the socialism, and you're seeing it now in the tide now with the political, and your demographic in Southern Florida has become huge in the news because of you guys are getting uprose in the voting numbers, and it's becoming very much, this election is like triggering something. And what do you hear about, even not much in your own family, but all throughout Southern Florida and the Cubans and the rising tide of socialism? Is it, what are the sentiments that you hear? What is the paradigm that you're hearing or you're feeling in Southern Florida with the Cuban Americans?
Well, I think it's kind of like a little bit of like 80-20, and I'll explain what my 80-20 is. I believe that there's an 80% of the Miami, South Florida population, Hispanic wise, and this is not just the Cuban community, but you also look at like the Venezuelan community, that feel that with the current tide, they don't want the U.S. to turn into what their native countries are with these socialist communist governments, right? But then you see a certain like 20% that feel that with the past administration's doings and certain dealings, that they want to keep that because they think that that with a certain embargo that was lifted, that they're able to send money and medicine to relatives who are still stuck on the island of Cuba, or let's say even to Venezuela. So it's kind of like that, but I would say for the 80% is really in favor of keeping the current form of government, of democracy and capitalism that the United States has to offer as the way to go, because it's the way that they wanted to live but couldn't because of how Fidel turned that country after he overtook Bautista.
I mean, that's so poignant because that is the difference between reading it in a book and living it, paradigm switch and stuff like that. And you talked about your dad a lot. What about the female's perspective from Cubans and how they lived and when they come up? What is your grandmother and your mom? What are their sentiments about everything that's going on?
So, Donnie, let me tell you, I guess, the story about how my mom, when the Bay of Pigs was going on, like how her story came about to come to the U.S. So if you've read the history of, the Cuban Missile Crisis and then, branching down to the Bay of Pigs, there was also a Catholic church group that created a program called the Peter Pan program, right? And the Peter Pan program was started by the Catholic groups to help essentially kids get out of the communist Cuba country and bring them to the United States and escape. So when the Bay of Pigs was going on, my mom and my aunt, her sister, now I'm going to put this in perspective, they're also 10 years apart. So my mom was 9 years old and my aunt was 19 years old, but they had to hop on a plane without my grandmother and grandfather, their parents. They both had to stay, and they were taken from Cuba all the way to New Mexico, specifically Albuquerque, New Mexico, and they got placed in a foster home for about, I think it was 6 years. So
wow.
The real challenge there was being the children of that era being separated from their biological parents because their parents sacrificed themselves to stay in Cuba to try to fight the good fight. So they were essentially transported to the United States by the Catholic Church in that Peter Pan program to escape this oppression and socialist country. So, for the audience out there that's listening, imagine a world where you are 9 years old or even a young adult at 19 in the case of my aunt and being separated from your parents for about 10 years, essentially, because it was about 6 years that they stayed in New Mexico with the foster family, something to that extent. And then my parents were able to move, or not my parents, excuse me, but my mom and my aunt were able to move from Albuquerque, New Mexico, all the way to New Jersey because that's where my grandparents were able to escape from when they were able to get out of Cuba.
Wow, I mean it's a pretty selfless act too of your parents. I can imagine having to leave mine for 10 years but it's for a better life, because that's the end of it. You want your kids to have a better life. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is a poignant story, absolutely. The fact that at 9 years old, you basically on your own, and it's still better than being there. That's very telling about the climate.
And then, Donnie, I'll put it to you. You asked me earlier, right? But now that I've given you both, like, mom and dad's side story, they both, till this day, still despise what it is that Fidel Castro and now Raul Castro, his brother who took over in power, they still despise and hate everything that they have turned into the country. So I'm going to give you a little bit of substance. For example, in a lot of the movies, right, that we watch, and for example, in Die Another Day, when they did the Cuba scenes, we know based off of the behind the scenes footage in the DVDs that was filmed off the coast of Spain. And they did a great job aesthetically portraying Cuba, right? But that's just the tourism side that everybody gets to see. And that's like glamorized. But if you really want to understand like the true nuts and bolts, there is these families in these homes. And I still have like some second and third cousins that live there that, for instance, they can't get so much as like a package of meat. Like, we could go to the local market and just buy, some ribeyes or some, in Spanish it's called palomilla, but like these thin steaks, we can go there and spend $8. They can't even get that. So, what people see on the news or whatnot, or how the commercial ads were glamorized when the last administration opened up the embargo for travel, whatever. I mean, it's pretty, but that's all done for the tourism dollars so that the country can continue to do it. But really, the country is still starving for basic necessities in foods and medicines, for simple antibiotics and whatnot. So it's not all. So, the answer to your question that you asked me a while back about my dad, what are his thoughts? Like, does he despise the US or does he despise Cuba? No, both my parents, after telling you both sides of their story, they despise Cuba because of the type of government that was brought on by Fidel. And talking to my mom last night, Donnie, because I told her that I was going to be on this, she said, if Fidel had not done what he had done in climbing the mountain and taking over, chances are that I would have probably been born in Cuba because they would have stayed there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a crazy story. I mean, it's so again, thank you so much for sharing that. It's deep stuff.
No worries. I mean, and what's crazy to think is that how the parallel in Dr. No, I guess now having studied history as a, more mature adult than when I first saw it as a kid or even as a young adult, like in my early 20s, like how the parallels are there. And, an interesting fact nugget, you and I watch documentaries all the time, but according to one of the documentaries released last year, Ian Fleming got a lot of his stories from CIA agents or operatives. So to me, there's no coincidence in this parallel that, with the missile headed towards Miami and Dr. No, and how the Cuban Missile Crisis was all about having a missile pointed at Miami. Yeah, I mean, it's clear that they knew that this was going to be a problem. I think the CIA kind of always knew that they had to watch out for the Caribbean, especially Cuba, because of its close proximity. And then it came to fruition. So it was really interesting parallels. And thank you again so much for all the things that you talked about today. You really shared a lot of stuff. I feel silly to even go here, but I have to. It's quantum of history. I have to do this, right? Yes, you do. Okay, if you're going to ride a missile, okay, you're getting sent in a missile, you can only pick one bond. Girl, you're still getting sent all the way over to Miami. Who's on the missile with you? Who is on the missile with me? Man. Remember, it's short, okay? Because the missile's going to land, it's going to blow up, all right? So this isn't married. This is, all right, that's it. Listen. Last hurrah. Last hurrah? What are we talking about from the whole film franchise? The whole film franchise. Pick one. Well, listen, I know that you're Mr. De Armas, so I'm not going to pick Anno, but I guess I'm in a tug of war. But I'm going to go with Alexa King, Sophie Marceau. Good. Sophie Marceau was always my favorite until... I have your contexts. I haven't seen her yet, but she's already got it. But that's a great pick, buddy. Great pick. Sophie Marceau, Electric King. Can't argue with that, buddy. So I want to thank you again for coming on today. Daniel, you were fantastic. And thank you so much for sharing this sentiment. Because I think it's important to not just... When you read things, it's so much different reading things and having ideas and then the actual implementation and the actual reality and the consequences of those ideas. Because there's so many things that you don't foresee that happen. And you're sharing the stories about, your mom being 9 years old, being sent out, your dad, your grandfather, all these things. Thank you so much for sharing today, Daniel. Thanks for hopefully do it again, buddy. Thank you again for coming on, bud. No worries, Donnie. My pleasure. Take care. Likewise. Thank you, Danny, for coming on. It's always such a treat. Such a treat to have you on, bud. You're always fun. And he's a Marlins fan, which is like really rare. I mean, who likes the Marlins? Your guess is as good as mine, too. I don't get it either, but he's a really good dude. So, again, thank you for having me on. Thank you for sharing those times and those aspects of your life with us. So, thank you again. So much good. So, this is going to be wrapping up my first soiree into YouTube, my first soiree doing both the podcast and the YouTube. If you're listening to me on the podcast, as always, thanks again. Thanks for tuning in, as always. If you're listening to me on YouTube, watching me on YouTube, this is your first time watching. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you see what I have. It's your first time actually hearing what I have to do with quantum history or hearing what I'm trying to do with this podcast, with this YouTube channel. Go ahead and start listening to the podcast. I'll be turning those over to YouTube videos
It won't be like this. I hadn't record like this, but I'll make it work. But start with the first one. Don't start with the first one. I'm sorry. Don't go to the intro. I may delete it. I don't know. I want to save it as a timepiece to be like, God, wow, that was awful. Don't start with the intro. Just start with 17, which is Moonraker, and work your way back. So that way, by the time you get to like the intro, you're like, all right, well, I give him a pass. Give me a pass. Just like you have to give the ending of Dr. No a pass, because it was the first one, didn't have the budget, didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know what I was doing, and I had no idea, and I was recording in my car. So now I get to record in front of Anna with all this other stuff. So I've come a little ways. So thank you guys so much. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. If you're not subscribing to me, if you're not clicking subscribe. I don't know. I see all these YouTube things are always like, subscribe. So I'm gonna say the same thing. Subscribe to me if you like what I did. If you like what you're seeing. If you like what direction, and if you don't mind watching me, proselytize and just jammer on for however long this ends up being, probably like 40 minutes, but subscribe. I don't know why I'm using that voice. Subscribe. All right. So again, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been Quantum of History. I'm your host, Donnie Waldron. Thank you so much. Tune again. Next episode coming soon. I got a lot of stuff coming forward. And as for watching me on YouTube, I will have all the other ones eventually as YouTube videos as well. So thank you so much. Looking forward. Subscribe. Thank you guys. Stay positive out there, guys. Thank you.